Did Christian values lead to American freedoms? Short answer, unapologetically no. A persistent myth in American discourse, often echoed in churches, textbooks, and political speeches, claims that Christianity is the bedrock of the freedoms we enjoy today. As an African American, I find this revision especially bitter, not simply because it's false, but because it echoes a familiar tactic: the rewriting of history to make oppression seem redemptive and domination seem divine. We've seen this before. It's the same kind of revision that tried to silence or sanitize the voices of Martin Delany, Frederick Douglass, Carter G. Woodson, and Booker T. Washington, all men who told a far more complex, defiant, and liberating story about Black life in America. The truth is, Christianity did not give us freedom. It often stood in its way. A core argument for this assertion is that Christian values do not support freedom. Christianity, as practiced historically and doctrinally, is rooted in submission, hierarchy, and obedience, not freedom. Key scriptures such as "every knee shall bow and every tongue confess," "slaves obey your masters," and even "wives submit to your husbands" reveal that freedom was never the goal. Order and control were. Systems built on these scriptures have oppressed women, enslaved Black people, and justified monarchy and theocracy, the very things that the American experiment rejected, at least in word. Another argument for this assertion is that Christianity has Christ-washed human progress. Many modern values like freedom of thought, gender equality, abolition of slavery, consent, religious pluralism, and even democracy were resisted by Christian institutions. Once those ideas gained traction, Christianity retroactively claimed them as its own, a process I call Christwashing. Christwashing is the act of retroactively crediting Christianity for moral, cultural, or societal progress that it initially resisted or opposed. Much like whitewashing obscures historical wrongdoings by painting it in a favorable light, Christwashing rebrands progress such as abolition, women's rights, democracy, and civil liberties as Christian achievements, despite overwhelming evidence that Christian institutions often fought against those very movements. For a clear definition, Christwashing is the revisionist practice of attributing moral or social advancements to Christianity after the fact, concealing the religion's prior resistance to those changes in order to maintain moral and cultural authority. A perfect example of this is the Civil Rights Movement. While yes, some clergy were involved, the majority of American churches were either silent or actively opposed to political activism. Here's a quote by Frederick Douglass to drive this point home. He said, "I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land." Douglass struggled with reconciling the Christ of propaganda with Christianity in practice. Another argument for this assertion is that Christian values aren't even original. This one might as well be the nail in the coffin. Even Christianity's most cherished values are borrowed, not born of its tradition. The Ten Commandments reflect basic moral codes that existed long before the Bible was written or even thought of. These laws appear in the Code of Hammurabi, which were in Mesopotamia around 1754 BCE. It's a comprehensive legal code with commandments like prohibitions against murder, theft, and dishonesty. But then there's also the Egyptian Book of the Dead, specifically the Negative Confession or Declaration of Innocence, popular around 1800 BCE. Where the deceased declares moral innocence before entering the afterlife, saying things like, "I have not committed murder, I have not stolen, I have not uttered lies, I've not caused pain, I've not taken food from a child." These ethical statements precede the Mosaic laws by centuries and show that human morality is not a divine invention, but a human necessity. Don't kill, don't steal equals basic survival ethics, not divine revelation. But we can even consider the Sermon on the Mount. Ideas like loving enemies, turning the other cheek, and the Golden Rule predate Jesus by thousands of years. You can consider Confucius, who was popular in the 5th century BCE, who said, "Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself." But these type of reflections are also seen in Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and even Greek philosophy, which Christianity was heavily correlated with in its infancy. This makes Christianity a sponge, not a source. It borrows from human empathy, codifies it with divine authority, then takes credit for what it absorbed. Hey, real quick, are you enjoying this content? Consider becoming a patron to support what is quickly becoming one of the fastest growing movements on the globe. Not only do patrons get access to exclusive community and content, they also get regular free products including ebooks, content guides, workbooks, journals, and that list is constantly growing. I'm committed to empowering as many people and communities as I can, and your support, large or small, goes a long way in helping us sustain the movement and change lives. I can't wait to welcome you in Patreon. Now back to the conversation. We must also consider the high cost of tolerating religion. Religion borrows morality, it doesn't create it. The narrative that religion is the source of morality is historically and philosophically backwards. Morality is the human capacity to distinguish right from wrong. It's rooted in empathy, cooperation, survival, and social cohesion. It emerged from human experience long before a religious text attempt to codify it. In other words, morality is indistinguishable from humanity. Religion has survived by adapting to moral progress it did not initiate. As societies evolved, religious institutions selectively absorbed those moral norms and reframed them as divinely inspired, securing their cultural authority by posing as moral pioneers rather than reluctant adopters. Religion survives not by producing morality, but by chasing it and then taking credit. And so, yes, there is a cost of tolerating Christianity's moral mask. In tolerating Christianity, we've allowed a repressive and hierarchical system to cloak itself in virtue, misleading millions into equating compliance with goodness, submission with holiness, and blind belief with moral superiority. We allowed Christianity to define virtue as obedience rather than critical thinking. We allowed it to shape law and policy while ignoring how much it has stood in the way of justice and equality. We allowed it to embed itself in education, politics, and even family systems, often silencing dissent and punishing divergence under the guise of godliness. This tolerance has propped up an institution that often resists liberation while branding itself as a sponsor. Now, I can't move on from this topic without addressing the common claims by believers and the phenomenon behind them. See, many believers will say that belief in God gives me peace, hope, or even makes me a better person. And quite frankly, this one deserves a whole video in itself. But for the sake of this, there's actually a name for this phenomenon. It's called social desirability bias. It's a type of response bias where people answer questions, make statements, or report behaviors in ways that they believe will be viewed favorably by others, even if those responses don't fully align with their true thoughts, feelings, experiences, or actions. In other words, people often say what sounds good, not what's actually real for them. When everyone feels pressured to say they believe, it creates the illusion that everyone believes, reinforcing the norm and making doubt or dissent feel deviant. Now, this creates a feedback loop. People fake belief, society assumes everyone believes, pressure increases, and then more people fake belief. Social desirability bias helps explain why so many believers repeat the same talking points even when they don't hold up under scrutiny or when their private lives reflect something entirely different. It's not evidence of belief, folks. It's evidence of cultural conformity. There's also cognitive dissonance to consider, which is the discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs, such as knowing your faith has oppressive tenets while still calling it a force for good. This causes people to rationalize and self-deceive. But then along with that, we also have the terror management theory, which suggests belief in an afterlife buffers existential fear of death, increasing adherence to religious systems. Terror management theory proposes that the human awareness of our mortality creates deep existential anxiety, much of which is created by religious doctrine. Now, to buffer this anxiety, we adopt cultural worldviews and beliefs that provide meaning and a sense of permanence. In religious systems, the promise of an afterlife serves as a powerful buffer. It suggests that death isn't the end, but a transition to another, often eternal existence. This belief helps reduce the fear of mortality, making us more likely to cling to religious doctrines and practices. In essence, the more religion promises a meaningful existence after death, the stronger its grip may be on those who seek comfort from the terror of our finite nature. But now, let's talk groupthink and normative influence. In tight-knit communities such as churches, members conform to dominant narratives, even if privately doubtful. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when a group values harmony, consensus, and cohesion over critical thinking or individual truth. In these environments, members suppress dissent to avoid conflict or being seen as a problem. Characteristics of groupthink in religious settings can be questioning doctrine is viewed as divisive or rebellious. Alternative interpretations are seen as threats to unity. There's pressure to agree publicly, even if people feel unsure privately. And people often silence themselves to avoid being ostracized or shamed. Now, normative influence is the pressure people feel to conform in order to be accepted, valued, and included in a group. It's not about believing something is true. It's about behaving in a way that protects social belonging. In religious communities, people pray, testify, or shout hallelujah not always because they feel it, but because that's what's expected. Young people raised in church often adopt the community's beliefs reflexively, not critically, to maintain the security of family and social bonds. A person may stay in a church for years because everyone I love is here, even if they privately disagree with doctrine or theology. Real-life examples are the silent doubters that are out there. Many pastors, members, and leaders have private doubts but remain in place because their livelihood, reputation, or relationship depends on maintaining appearances. Speaking up would isolate them from the only community they've ever known. There's also praise culture in churches where emotion-driven worship is expected. People may pretend to feel spiritual emotions, fearing judgment for looking cold or disconnected from the presence of God. The pressure to perform authentic faith becomes emotional theater, not genuine connection. And then there's also the doctrinal echo chambers. I told you, we're going deep on this one. When everyone affirms the same beliefs week after week, it creates a false sense of certainty. Disagreement is discouraged, complex topics are oversimplified, the group becomes resistant to new information, and a closed loop of confirmation bias forms. These forces help explain why religious communities appear more unified than they actually are. The pressure to conform silences honest questioning, creating a fragile consensus maintained by fear, shame, and belonging. Many people don't believe, they just don't want to be alone. This insight helps deconstruct the myth that religious belief is deeply held by all who express it. Often what we see is social compliance, not spiritual conviction. And just in case you were curious, yes, there is supporting research to undermine these claims. There is Dr. Ara Noranzanyan's work, Big Gods: How Religion Transformed Cooperation in Conflict. In it, he unpacks how belief in gods evolved to enforce group norms, not because gods are real or moral. There's also Linda Lascola's and Daniel Dennett's work, Preachers Who Are Not Believers, where they have interviews with clergy who lost belief but stayed in ministry, confirming social conformity over personal conviction. Here's a quote from their report. What will happen to these pastors? Are they, in fact, in a good position to lead their congregations toward their own understandings, or are they condemned by their own commitments to parishioners, their families, their colleagues, to perpetuate the double standards of sincerity that they've crafted so unwittingly over the years? We all find ourselves committed to little white lies, half-truths, and convenient forgettings, knowing tacitly which topics not to raise with which of our loved ones and friends. But these pastors, and who knows how many others, are caught in a larger web of diplomatic, tactical, and finally ethical concealment. In no other profession surely is one so isolated from one's fellow human beings, so cut off from the fresh air of candor, never knowing the relief of getting things off one's chest. There's also Phil Zuckerman's work, Society Without God, which shows that secular countries like Sweden and Denmark have higher morality, better outcomes, and lower crime, proving religion is not necessary for good values. If Christian values had led to American freedoms, Christianity wouldn't have had to be dragged kicking and screaming into every human rights advancement we now celebrate, and it is once again threatening. The truth is, freedom has always been a humanist fight, and Christianity has always been its reluctant shadow, not its shining light. Let's stop pretending that Christianity was the architect of American freedom when history shows it was the locksmith on the door. Every inch of progress, abolition, women's rights, civil rights, free speech, freedom of thought, had to be wrestled from the grip of Christian institutions that preached obedience, not liberty, conformity, not conscience. Christianity did not lead us to freedom. It followed us there. After resisting, after persecuting, after even moralizing oppression. Then, like a plagiarist, it slapped its name on the title page and dared to call itself the author of liberty. And you want to know the real punchline? The values we call Christian today, tolerance, equality, compassion, critical thought, were the same values that they used to burn people for. So no, Christian values don't build freedom. Freedom had to be built in spite of Christian values. And if you want to know who built it, look to the people they tried to silence, the ones they called rebels, heretics, slaves, and radicals, the ones who kept rising anyway. The truth is this: freedom is a humanist inheritance. And it's time we stop giving credit to the very system that had to be dragged, exposed, and outgrown every time we've stepped closer to justice. If you found this valuable, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's still stuck in the Christ-washed version of history. And if you're ready for that next breakdown, tap in. We're not here to flatter belief, We're here to free minds. Check out my most recent video, Did Jesus Really Help the Poor? It is an eye-opener. Or join me for Bible study with an ex-pastor on Wednesdays for a useful secular humanist breakdown of the Bible. And feel free to hop into our Sunday sessions where we focus on personal growth and development every week. And last but not least, check me out every day with Chris Mallard and Ryan Kotastic on the Daily Atheist Morning Show. I'll see you in the next one. And until next time, keep rising.